The glass of red wine shattered across the marble floor, and in that single instant everything shifted. "You clumsy, useless thing." The words cut through the stillness of the Sterling, the most exclusive fine dining room in the Upper East Side, a place where every table was a privilege reserved for the powerful, and where a single mistake could end not only a dinner but a person's reputation. Ella Parker froze, her fingers still trembling as red wine streamed down her wrist and dripped onto the white apron already stained from endless double shifts. Before her, the cream-colored Dior gown belonging to the aristocratic woman now carried a vivid scarlet blotch spreading across the fabric like spilled blood. The woman's face, Charlotte Van Doren, shifted from shock to fury in the span of a heartbeat, and Ella knew. She simply knew that whatever was coming would be terrible. "I am sorry," Ella whispered, her voice so faint it could barely cross the silence that had fallen over the dining room. "I tripped." "I did not mean—" The slap landed before she could finish. The sound of a palm striking her cheek snapped through the room, sharp and dry like a whip crack cutting through the suspended clink of silverware. Ella's head jerked to the side, her hair tumbling forward to cover half her face as she stumbled back a step. A burning throb spread across her cheekbone, but the sting that filled her eyes came not from the physical pain, but from the humiliation of being struck in front of dozens of people, diners who had spent thousands of dollars to eat here. "Do you have any idea how much this dress costs?" Charlotte hissed, each word sinking like needles into flesh. She was beyond 60, her beauty preserved by the hands of Manhattan's finest cosmetic surgeons. The chandelier lights glittered against the diamonds around her neck and wrist, each stone likely worth an entire 5-year salary of Ella's elementary school teacher days. "You are trash. Someone like you belongs washing dishes in the back, not standing out here." Ella lowered her head, her hand cupping the growing welt. Every gaze in the room felt like a blade, cornering her in a place where there was nowhere left to move. "Enough." The voice rose behind Ella, low and steady, yet cold as forged steel. The room seemed to freeze. Ella could hear the echo of her own heartbeat as she turned around. The man standing there was tall, framed in a deep navy suit tailored with ruthless precision. Light skimmed along the line of his high nose and the pale storm gray of his eyes, cold yet commanding. Lucas King, owner of the Sterling. A man whose name employees only dared whisper and whom New York's elite admired and feared in equal measure. "Let me repeat myself. Who gave you permission to strike someone in my restaurant?" He did not raise his voice, but each word dropped against the marble like a weight that bent the room around it. "Do you even know who I am?" Charlotte snapped, stepping forward. "My husband is." "I know exactly who he is," Lucas cut in, not bothering to blink. "And I know exactly what he has been trying to keep hidden. Perhaps next time you should think carefully before insulting and assaulting one of my employees." He stepped beside Ella, his eyes brushing past her for no more than a second, yet the mere acknowledgement sent a tremor through her. Not from fear, but from the startling realization that for the first time in months of exhaustion and quiet loneliness, someone was standing on her side. Lucas looked to the head server. "Escort Mrs. Van Doren out. She is no longer welcome at Sterling from this moment forward." Charlotte flushed a deep angry red but said nothing more. Silence settled heavily across the dining room. No one moved. No one dared intervene. Ella stood there with her face burning and her head ringing. She wanted to run, to vanish, to fold herself into nothing. Yet something held her still, drawn to those storm-gray eyes, the eyes of the man who had just upended her world and who might be the only person in the room who could see who she truly was. If you are listening to this moment and you feel your heart stir even for a single beat at Ella's story, then perhaps you and I have already stepped together into a quiet and profound emotional journey. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it if you wish to keep traveling with us through stories that reach the deepest corners of hurt, courage, and hope every single day. Where are you listening from right now? Leave a comment with the name of your city or the country you are in, because we would truly love to know which corners of the world these stories have found their way to. And now, let us return to Ella, because that encounter was only the beginning. Ella could not quite remember how she made it out of the main dining hall. Everything seemed to pass through a thin veil of fog. Her unsteady footsteps, the dozens of staring eyes that still pressed against her like silent blades, carving into whatever pride she was trying to hold together. When the back kitchen door closed behind her, she nearly collapsed, her hand gripping the edge of the sink just to stay upright. Her cheek still burned, her heartbeat crashing wildly inside her chest. The smell of red wine, a mix of ripe grapes and humiliation, clung to the cuff of her sleeve. Ella felt nauseous. A young coworker rushed toward her, panicked, asking if she was all right, but she merely shook her head, swallowing her tears as she whispered that she needed a moment. She sank to the cold tile floor beside the red brick wall and covered her face with both hands. Her thoughts spun wildly through the chaos inside her mind, whether she was about to lose her job, whether this would affect the weekend shift she had begged to keep, whether her father's upcoming hospital bills had any part left to be salvaged. She tried to relive the moment the wine toppled, her foot catching the edge of the rug, and Charlotte's arm swinging wide in one of her exaggerated gestures as she laughed. Ella had apologized. She had done everything any server could possibly do in that situation. But the slap was the one thing she could not erase. The break room door swung open and the shift manager stepped in looking uneasy, his face a mix of tension and apprehension. "Ella, Mr. Lucas wants to see you. Right now." She shot to her feet on instinct, her heart pounding like a war drum. Every part of her braced for the worst. No one survived the Sterling after a mistake that drew this much attention. Lucas King was not known for kindness. He was cold, private, and in control of everything. The rumors about him were more numerous than the desserts on the menu. Some claimed he had once been an investment advisor for enormous corporations before abruptly walking away. Others whispered about shadowy connections in the worlds of finance and underground deals. But on one point everyone agreed. Lucas King did not forgive mistakes. Ella followed the manager down the narrow hallway, each footstep thudding against the stone floor and against her heartbeat. They stopped before a frosted glass door with the name L. King engraved in gold. The manager knocked softly and then opened the door for her. Inside was a wide room, simple yet elegant, black leather furniture, slate gray walls, and a large window overlooking New York City shimmering with evening lights. Lucas stood with his back to her, his hands in his pockets, his body still as a sculpture. Ella swallowed, her voice barely more than a breath. I am sorry. I truly did not mean to. If needed, I can pay for her dress. I can work extra hours. I just hope I can keep this job." Lucas turned around. The warm gold light from the ceiling cast sharp, defined shadows along his features, making every line of his face look even more intense. His gaze paused on the left side of Ella's face where the red mark still burned. "You are apologizing for being struck?" he asked, his voice quiet yet carrying something that made her chest tighten. "I do not want to cause trouble," Ella murmured, lowering her head. "I need this job." "I am not asking whether you need this job," Lucas replied as he stepped closer. "I am asking why you are apologizing when you are the one who was humiliated in front of a room full of people." Ella had no answer. She had never been accustomed to anyone taking her side. All she knew was that in her world, when something went wrong, no matter how small, the weaker one was always the one who paid the price. Lucas stopped in front of her, close enough for her to notice the faint scar along his right jawline, close enough for her to see that his eyes held no anger at all but something that resembled concern fused with a quiet, simmering fury. "You are not losing your job," he said firmly, "and you are not paying for the dress or the wine. Those matters have already been taken care of. I do not allow customers to strike my employees." Ella blinked, unable to believe what she had heard. She had prepared herself to pack her things and leave in silence, just as she had done so many times before. But this man, with his austere exterior and storm-gray eyes, was protecting her in a way no one ever had. Lucas walked toward his desk, but before sitting down he spoke a single sentence that made her go still. "You apologized. You were humiliated, and you stayed calm. I was watching." He lifted his head, his eyes still fixed on her. "I see everything that happens in my restaurant, Ella, and I remember who deserves to be treated fairly." Ella had no idea what to say, but for the first time in many months, the fear of losing everything no longer felt suffocating. And in that quiet room she began to understand that perhaps the moment the wine shattered might have been the beginning of something entirely different. Lucas finally sat behind his desk, but his gaze did not leave her, as though he were weighing something far more important than any financial report or luxury menu in the world. She remained standing, too afraid to sit, her legs beginning to tremble from tension. The silence was so complete she could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock. Inside her, everything was still unsettled. The sting of the slap lingered on her cheek, and Lucas's words, Telling her she was not being fired felt like a small miracle so sudden she did not know what to do with the emotions rising inside her. Lucas opened a drawer, took out a folder neatly enclosed in a black leather cover, and placed it gently on the desk. He tapped his fingers lightly on it before lifting his gaze to meet hers. "I have an offer for you, Ella." His voice was even but certain. "I want you to take the position of private dining coordinator. You would be responsible for overseeing all VIP events upstairs." Ella blinked, struggling to understand what he was saying. I do not understand. I have never been a manager. I am just a teacher working weekends." "I have no experience too. You have sharp eyes, quick reflexes, and you know how to stay composed in a crisis. You did not run when you were publicly humiliated, and you still apologized to someone who mistreated you. Those are not qualities everyone has," Lucas replied without hesitation. "I have been watching you since your first day. Not just tonight." Ella felt her heart skip. She had never imagined she could impress anyone in this place, let alone the powerful owner himself. "But why me?" she asked, her voice fading. "I am only a fill-in. I am not even officially on staff." Lucas remained silent for a long moment, then stepped toward her, closing the distance to only a few strides. "Because I believe everyone deserves a real chance, especially when they are fighting every day just to survive." He paused, his expression softening. "I know your father is in the hospital." "The nursing center in Brooklyn, correct. Mid-stage Alzheimer's." Ella startled, her lips parting, without sound. She had not told anyone at the restaurant. She did not want pity. She hid everything, even the nights she came home late, scrubbing floors while checking medical forms, calling nurses, trying to gather enough money for the next week's medication. "I know," Lucas repeated more gently. "Not because I am following you, but because I pay attention. My employees are not numbers. I saw you walking to work in the rain. I saw you staying late to clean when no one asked. I know you are trying." He placed the folder into her hands. "This position pays 3 times what you earn now. Full-time. Health insurance for your family, including long-term treatment." Ella opened the folder, her eyes sweeping across the lines she could hardly believe were real. A genuine contract, clear, detailed terms. She had never held anything like this in her life. Her heart pounded so hard she feared someone might hear it. She swallowed. "I do not know what to say. I am not sure I deserve it." Lucas tilted his head, a faint shadow of a smile flickering in his eyes. "That is exactly why you do." Ella lowered her gaze to the folder, emotion rising like a powerful tide inside her. Since her mother died, since her father fell ill, since life had collapsed in on her, she had never once felt seen or acknowledged the way she did now. Lucas stepped back, placing his hands in his pockets, his voice slow but steady. "You do not have to answer now. Go home and rest. Tomorrow morning, if you are ready, see Thomas at the HR desk to complete the paperwork." Ella nodded, unable to fully grasp what had just happened. As she turned to leave his office, her hand still clutching the folder to her chest like something fragile and precious, she was not certain what tomorrow would bring. But she did know one thing. Tonight, for the first time in a very long time, she would sleep without the constant fear pressing against her ribs. And it had all begun with a shattered glass of wine and a slap delivered in front of the entire world. Ella woke earlier than usual the next morning, even though she had barely slept at all. The folder still sat neatly on her table, exactly where she had placed it, before spending hours in silence, afraid that if she closed her eyes it might disappear. But when the sunlight streamed through the window and glimmered across the embossed words, the sterling on the black leather cover, it confirmed that none of it had been a dream. She had truly been given a chance, and she would not let it slip away. Ella chose the cleanest white shirt she owned, pinned her hair back, and walked to the restaurant with a sense of hope she had not felt in a very long time. When she arrived, Thomas, the ever-upright assistant with the serious face and precise words, was already waiting for her at the HR counter. He led her to a private elevator and up to the 3rd floor, a world entirely separate from the rest of the restaurant. There were no clattering silverware or murmuring conversations, only a dimly lit wood-paneled hallway and the faint fragrance of fresh flowers lining the walkway. "This is the private dining floor," Thomas explained, handing her another stack of documents. "There will be 3 to 4 events each week, most of them charity dinners or discreet gatherings for political or corporate circles. You will coordinate everything from menus and service to decor." Ella nodded, clutching the papers as though they were an anchor. Before Thomas left, he paused, his voice strangely softer. Congratulations. Not many people earn the boss's trust. His words warmed her in a way she could not quite name. Her new office was small but complete, a walnut desk, a new computer, a detailed event calendar pinned to the wall, and a large window overlooking the shaded courtyard below. Her first morning vanished in a blur of emails, calls, and note-taking. She met the head chef, learned how to read the wine distribution sheets, and listened to the irritable French chef complain about the wrong type of caviar being sent. Still, she wrote everything down, asked questions when she needed to, and even suggested more efficient arrangements. By noon, as the first test event took place, a small luncheon for a scholarship fund, Ella directed the servers, checked the lighting, and caught a printing error on the guest name cards, fixing it before anyone noticed. She had never imagined she could be good at a job like this, but up here, on the quiet, polished third floor, she was no longer the clumsy server under the disdainful eyes of the elite. She was someone with a voice, with value, with responsibility. When everything finally settled, Ella slipped onto the back balcony to breathe. She leaned on the railing, closed her eyes, and let the gentle breeze brush the faint bruise on her cheek. She thought of her father, of the long nights at his bedside, of the medical bills waiting at home, then of Lucas, the man who appeared just when her world had collapsed. He had not only stopped Charlotte from humiliating her, he had not only offered her a position, he had given her a chance to stand upright, to be seen, to be trusted. At that moment, the glass door behind her opened. The steady footsteps she already recognized sounded against the floor, and she turned, unsurprised to see Lucas approaching. "You did well," he said simply, his eyes sweeping across the room inside. "I heard the guests were very pleased." Ella nodded, trying to contain the quiet smile rising inside her. "Thank you. For everything." Lucas stood beside her, both of them looking out over the rooftops of the old buildings. "I am not looking for gratitude. I am looking for proof that I was right to choose you." Ella turned, her eyes meeting the pale gray of his, and in that moment she was no longer the girl slapped across a luxury dining room. She was Ella Parker, a woman rewriting her own story, and she knew she would not look back. From that afternoon, standing beside Lucas on the reception, third-floor balcony, Ella began to feel that her world was shifting, not loudly or abruptly, but quietly, like the small waves that soothe the shore after a storm. She approached each workday with a fierce focus, as though mastering every detail could keep the rest of her fragile life from slipping away. She memorized the preferences of regular guests, from how they liked their wine poured to their favorite flowers for evening receptions. She learned to work seamlessly with the kitchen, to handle crises without chaos, and to hide the nights she lost sleep because her father's confusion had grown worse. Then strange things began to happen, small enough at first that Ella barely noticed. One morning she received a call from the nursing center saying her father's next 3 months of expenses had been fully covered, including a special cognitive therapy plan she once thought was impossible. When she called back, they told her the payment came from an anonymous support fund. A few days later, she realized someone had adjusted her schedule, shifting her shifts to daytime and freeing her weekends, the exact hours her father was most alert and needed her near. One day her aging laptop died in the middle of drafting an event plan, pushing her toward panic because every guest list and essential document lived inside it. She planned to pay for repairs even though she had no spare money that month, but the next morning a new laptop sat on her desk with a handwritten note carrying only 3 words: "Just do well." There was no signature, but Ella recognized the crisp handwriting immediately. She said nothing, and Lucas never mentioned it. Whenever they crossed paths, whether on the third-floor hallway or the discreet elevator reserved for upper staff, he only nodded, or gave her a brief look that told her he was still watching over her, never interfering, never asking, never making her feel small. His presence was steady, quiet, like the unseen foundation of a wall that stands firm against the wind. Ella did not dare ask him about any of it, partly out of gratitude and partly out of fear that probing too deep might break the delicate bridge between them. But with time she began to see that Lucas's presence in her life was not accidental. These were the unmistakable traces left by a man trying to help without making someone feel indebted. Once, she caught him speaking with Denise, the longtime VIP guest relations manager. She had been about to turn away when she heard his low voice. "If she looks tired, send her home early. Do not ask. Just rearrange the schedule. Ella stood in the hallway, her back against the wall, her throat tightening. She knew he meant her. And in that moment, what moved her was not the help itself, but the way he protected her dignity. He helped her as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if she deserved it without needing to bow her head. And that was what made her understand that Lucas King had not simply given her a job. He had quietly pieced her life back together, one fragment at a time, without ever asking for recognition. She began to realize that sometimes there are hands that reach out without gripping tightly, but still manage to pull someone from the edge. And Lucas, with all his silent strength, was exactly that kind of man. In the days that followed, Lucas's presence in the orbit of Ella's life became sharper, no longer a series of quiet coincidences or silent acts of support, but a collection of small, lingering moments that slipped into the rhythm of her days as though he had always been there, and she had simply been too overwhelmed to notice. He never entered her office without knocking, never stayed long when she was busy, but each time he paused at her doorway he left behind something that unsettled her in ways she could not admit. A cup of coffee made exactly the way she liked, though she had never told him, a gentle reminder about a small detail she had overlooked in a plan, or simply the way his eyes lingered a second too long when they happened to face each other. Ella found herself waiting for those moments, though she refused to acknowledge it even in her own thoughts. She told herself it was only professional courtesy, that Lucas was simply a responsible and courteous man. But there were things she could not hide, like the way her heartbeat stuttered when she heard his footsteps in the hallway, or how she began choosing shirts with higher collars whenever she knew he would be present at the evening events. One night, after a late fundraising dinner, Ella was the last to remain, reviewing the donation list. She sat alone in her office, eyes aching, wrist throbbing from hours of typing. When the lights suddenly dimmed to a softer glow, she looked up and saw Lucas standing in the doorway, his jacket draped over his arm, his tie loosened. He said nothing at first, simply watched her for a few seconds, before stepping inside and placing a paper bag on her desk. "I noticed you skipped dinner. Your favorite dish from the Italian place near 56th Street. Ella looked from the bag to him, her lips tightening. How did you know I liked that?" Lucas shrugged, taking the seat across from her. "I pay attention." He said it as though it explained everything, and in a way, it did. She said nothing more. They ate together in an easy, quiet, without the usual small talk or stiffness, only the sound of utensils brushing against plastic containers and the warm taste of food, reminding Ella how hungry she had been. When she laughed softly after Lucas accidentally dropped a piece of bread, he smiled too, a rare, genuine expression that softened his entire face, making him look younger, less guarded. Ella watched him for a moment, and for the first time she wondered what lived behind that cold exterior, behind those winter-gray eyes. What scars shaped a man who could be so hard and yet so gentle, who could make someone feel safe with nothing more than a simple gesture. When they finished, Lucas stood, but instead of leaving, he paused beside her desk, his gaze falling to the empty container. "Ella," he said, calling her name without a title or a work context for the first time, "I do not know what I am doing." She looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" He held her gaze for a long moment, as though weighing each word. "I am not someone who gets close to people. I do not seek anything complicated. But—" He stopped and shook his head slightly. "You are making things less simple than they used to be." Ella did not know how to react. She felt something inside her stretch tight, fear and curiosity and tenderness tangling inside her. But instead of backing away, she answered quietly, "I feel the same. I do not know what this is, but I know I do not want it to end." Lucas looked at her as though reading between the lines, then nodded gently, saying nothing more. He walked out, leaving behind the faint, warm trace of his cologne. Ella sat still, her hand resting on the part of the desk he had touched, and inside her something flickered to life soft as a distant light in the dark, unclear, unhurried, but real, and enough to change everything. 3 days after that quiet evening, when Ella was still carrying the lingering emotions from that late meal with Lucas, the door to her past one she thought had closed forever was suddenly kicked open. She was standing in the first-floor hallway reviewing the weekend event menu with the kitchen team when her phone vibrated in her pocket. A strange number appeared. She hesitated, then answered, her voice small and cautious. "Hello?" A pause, then a familiar voice. deep and metallic, cold as rusted steel. "Hello, Ella." She went still. There was no mistaking it. Jared. For a moment all the kitchen noises vanished, leaving only the sound of her own breath, heavy and strangled. "You think I could not find you?" Jared continued, his voice slow, savoring each word. "You are good. You disappeared without a trace. But I always find a way." Ella turned away from the kitchen, walking quickly toward the stairwell, her heart slamming against her ribs. "I do not want to talk to you. Do not call again." "Oh, but I think you will want to hear this," Jared said, ignoring her warning entirely. "I have some pictures, interesting ones. You and your classy boss, coffee on the balcony, private dinners. Quite intimate." Ella froze at the bottom of the stairs, her palm suddenly cold. "You are following me?" "Not exactly. I am just keeping an eye on you. And I am curious whether this little relationship might affect your reputation. Or his." He emphasized the last word, like a blade slipping between her ribs. Ella tightened her grip on the phone, nausea rising into her throat. Jared, her ex, the man who once made her afraid to sleep in her own apartment, who smashed her phone because he saw a harmless message from a former student, who stood outside the nursing center, threatening to show the world who she really was if she did not give him money. She had run from him, changed numbers, moved, rebuilt her life from nothing. And now he was back, just when everything was finally becoming whole. "What do you want?" she whispered. "I have not decided," Jared replied. "But you should know I am not patient. If you do not want your sweet little photos everywhere, or reaching the man who is protecting you, then you will answer when I call." The line cut off. Ella stood there, unable to move. She did not know how long it took to drag herself back to her office, lock the door, and gasp for air as though she had been running for miles. She collapsed into her chair, her gaze empty. In a single moment, everything good she had built, her job, her fragile peace, the unspoken warmth in Lucas's eyes felt like a soap bubble she was too afraid to touch. She knew Jared. He would not stop after one call. He was the kind of man who fed on fear, especially from the woman who had dared to leave him. Ella clasped her hands together. Should she tell Lucas? Or stay silent to keep him away from the ugliness she knew too well? But staying silent meant letting Jared hold power again, letting him drag her back into the shadows. Ella rose slowly, taking a breath that scraped painfully down her throat. She knew what she had to do, even if it terrified her. She was not the girl who once cried in a dark apartment, terrified of the sound of a key turning in the lock. She had changed, and this time she would not let Jared destroy what she was rebuilding. But when she opened her door, ready to seek out Lucas, she found him already standing there, his hand resting lightly against the door as though he had been about to knock. He looked at her, the gray in his eyes clouded with concern. "Ella, are you all right? You disappeared from the prep meeting." Ella stared at him, her lips parting but no words forming. Because in that gaze, warm, sincere, free of judgment, she felt her chest tighten with the urge to cry. And that frightened her most of all. Because if the tears came, then all the secrets she had held together for so many years would break open with them. And when they did, would Lucas still look at her the same way? Ella stood silently before Lucas, her eyes rimmed with red from the fear she had been holding back all afternoon. She wanted to tell him everything, yet her throat tightened as though bound by invisible threads woven from the past. Lucas said nothing, but he stepped into the room, closing the door gently behind him, and looked at her for a long moment, a look without pressure or demand, simply waiting, the way he always did. Ella drew a breath, then exhaled slowly as though speaking might shatter something fragile that had only just begun to form between them. But she spoke. She told him about Jared, about the relationship that had trapped her inside her own fear, about the phone calls, the threats, the photographs he held. Lucas did not interrupt, he only listened, his hands clasped loosely, his gaze steady on her face. When she finished, her voice unsteady, she could not bring herself to look at him. "I am sorry. I did not want to drag you into this. I know I am just an employee, and you do not owe me anything." "You are not dragging me into anything, Ella," Lucas said, cutting her off, his voice deep and firm like a vow. He put himself into it. Ella looked up, and in those storm-gray eyes she saw something she had never seen so clearly before. Not just concern or protection, but a restrained fury, silent and dangerous like the sea, moments before it breaks into a storm. Only a few hours later, Jared received an invitation to meet a man who introduced himself as legal counsel for the Sterling. The meeting was arranged at a quiet bar in the financial district, a place with no cameras, no familiar faces, nowhere to run. When Jared entered, he was not surprised to see Lucas seated in a shadowed corner booth. He smirked, slid into the seat across from him, acting as though this were nothing but a casual game. So, the elegant boss finally shows his face. Lucas regarded him with no visible emotion, his fingers tapping lightly against the glass of whiskey before him. I do not appreciate men who strike from the shadows, especially when they target one of my employees. Jared raised an eyebrow. So she told you everything? She is impressive. Performs almost as well as a model on stage. Ever wonder why she got close to you in the first place? Lucas tilted his head slightly, his eyes cooling. I know exactly why she stayed. And I know exactly what kind of man you are. As for the photos, there is nothing in them worth threatening anyone over. But threats, stalking, invasion of privacy, I have more than enough evidence. Jared laughed under his breath. Who do you think you are? Police? An attorney? I do not need to be anyone, Lucas replied. But I have enough attorneys to send you out of this city within a single day without anyone noticing. And if you ever go near Ella again, I will not use the law. I will use something else. His voice was low and slow, each word etched into the table like cold steel. Jared fell silent, the smirk fading. He knew men like Lucas, men who did not shout, did not posture, but whose actions, once set in motion, could not be stopped. Is that a threat? Jared asked, though his tone had dropped. No, Lucas said, rising to his feet and adjusting his jacket. It is a warning. Get out of her life. The sooner the better. Before leaving, Lucas turned back, his voice a quiet blade. A real man never makes the woman he once claimed to love afraid. But you were never a man. Jared remained seated, gripping his glass tightly, but he did not say another word. When Lucas stepped out of the bar, night had fallen, the cold wind slicing through the streets. But inside him, one truth was clearer than ever. Ella was no longer just an employee. She was the one thing he would walk into darkness to protect, and this time he would let no one touch her, not her past, not anything else. A week passed after that night when Lucas confronted Jared, and Ella felt as though she were living in a new world, one in which she no longer had to glance over her shoulder, no longer received anonymous messages or late-night calls that locked her lungs with fear. Jared vanished, unnervingly quiet, too quiet. And in that sudden peace, a seed of doubt took root, small at first, but spreading quickly. She knew Lucas had done something. The way he stepped into her life and handled everything made her feel safe, sheltered, but also left a faint unease she could not name. Lucas had not asked whether she wanted him to intervene. He simply acted, wielding his silent power as if it were nothing. Ella began to notice the calls he took when he thought she could not hear, the nights he left the restaurant past midnight and returned with that heavy, quiet expression. One evening, while sorting through employee files, she came across an internal memo from months before, with a line that made her breath catch. Personnel review. Ella Parker, full evaluation completed. Prioritize personal support per special recommendation from LK. The simple words tightened her chest. When had he evaluated her? What did personal support even mean? She began questioning the coincidences she had once believed were strokes of luck. Who contacted the nursing center about the new therapy? Who rearranged her schedule so she had time with her father? Who delivered the new laptop before she asked for help? Lucas. All of it tied back to Lucas. But if he had known about her situation long before the incident with Charlotte at the restaurant, why had he waited until then to approach her? And more importantly, why had he not told her? The questions pulled her away from the fragile place of safety she had only just reached. She remembered the look in Lucas's eyes when he faced Jared, not just anger, but something deeper, an unsettling familiarity, as though he had seen men like Jared his entire life. Ella did not want to believe it, but she began searching for answers. Late one night, after the restaurant lights dimmed, she opened her laptop and searched the name Lucas King, alongside the half-whispered rumors she had heard. Finance, withdrawal, lawsuit, Mafia. Old articles surfaced, many removed, but a few remained in archived screenshots. There had been a major scandal involving an investment fund nearly a decade earlier. Lucas had been a senior advisor, then suddenly resigned just before the fund was investigated for money laundering and underground financial ties. His name had never appeared in formal accusations, but there were vague notations about an inside source who quietly cooperated with government organizations to defuse the case. A man who disappeared from public sight for 3 years and emerged as the owner of a chain of luxury restaurants with no explanation. Ella closed the screen, her hands shaking, her heartbeat pounding like a drum. There was something inside Lucas she had never fully seen. A submerged layer, like thick ice beneath dark water. Always cold, always silent, but deeper and more dangerous than she had realized. The memories that had seemed warm, the gentle glances, the quiet acts of care, the late-night meal they shared now mixed with a sharp ache of uncertainty. She stepped out onto the third-floor balcony where she and Lucas had once stood together in silence. The night wind swept across her skin, cold enough to raise goosebumps down her spine. If Lucas had once lived inside the shadows of the underground world, if he had known things ordinary people should never touch, then was his appearance in her life truly an accident born from a spilled glass of wine on Charlotte's dress? Or had this all been a calculated move in a game she never knew existed, and she, Ella Parker, merely a pawn that had fallen exactly where he wanted? She did not know. But for the first time she began to wonder, if you care for someone but do not truly know who they are, is that still love at all? Lucas entered the office just as the clock struck 10 at night, still carrying that familiar calm presence. White shirt sleeves rolled, his jacket draped over his left arm. But when his eyes met Ella's standing by the window waiting, something in him shifted, as though he had always known this moment would come and saw no reason to avoid it any longer. Ella did not turn to him immediately. She remained facing the city fading into night, the distant high-rise lights glittering like unanswered questions. When she spoke, her voice was soft as wind, yet every word was unmistakably clear. "I searched your name online." Lucas did not respond at once. He walked to his desk, set down his jacket, then lifted his head to look directly at her. He showed no surprise, and strangely, that steadiness eased something inside her. "I read about the investment fund 10 years ago, about your sudden withdrawal, about the unspoken accusations." She turned then, her brown eyes fixed on him without blinking. "I need to know. Not to judge you, but to understand, Lucas, because I cannot take another step unless I know what ground I am standing on." Lucas nodded once, pulled out a chair, and sat with his arms loosely crossed as though preparing for a hearing. He did not avoid. He simply had not told this story to anyone in years. He began where everything started, at the age of 28, when he had been one of the brightest young financial advisors in New York, working at a top investment fund, managing million-dollar deals every month, hailed by the press as the golden mind of Wall Street. But behind that shine was a rotten system where money did not just buy stocks but bought silence, bought laws, and sometimes bought people. He discovered funds wired to unknown sources, contracts signed at midnight without audit, offshore accounts opened under the names of the dead. He said he initially believed he could fix things from within, but the deeper he dug, the clearer it became that he was just one small gear in a vast machine, one that no one wanted repaired. Then one night, he was offered money in amount large enough to make anyone disappear forever if he stayed quiet. Lucas refused. Instead, he began gathering evidence. Quietly, methodically. Every paper trail, every suspicious transaction, every deleted email. He said he did not do it for conscience, but for someone. His younger brother, Dylan, had lost everything after investing in a similar fund, and his death labeled an accident had changed everything. Lucas sent the entire file to a contact inside a federal investigative agency, then vanished, literally, from the world. 3 years living under another name, without credit cards, without social media, with no one knowing where he was. He used what remained of his money to open the Sterling, not to get rich, but to build the only thing he felt he could still control, a place untouched by outside forces, a place run by honor and principle. Ella stood motionless. She did not interrupt him, not once, because everything Lucas said fell into place with what she had always sensed about him, the steadiness, the solitude, the quiet anger that never erupted into sound. When he finished, silence filled the room like a thick blanket of snow. Then Ella stepped closer, very slowly, and when only a few steps separated them, she whispered. "I am not afraid of your past, Lucas. I am only afraid you did not trust me enough to tell me sooner." Something in his eyes fractured. He rose and stepped toward her, and for the first time laid his hand on her cheek, gentle as though she might disappear if he held on too tightly. He murmured, "I did not tell you because I feared you would look at me differently." Ella placed her hand over his. "But I do not look at you differently. I just see you more clearly. And I want to walk with you, no matter how dark the path ahead might be." Lucas said nothing more. He pulled her into his arms, and in that moment every secret, every sin, every mask fell away. Only two people remained uncovered, honest, and for the first time, fully trusting. After that night, everything between Ella and Lucas existed in a suspended space between past and present, between what neither dared to name and what neither could deny. They did not speak of what happened. No formal conversations, no promises, no labels. But there were subtle shifts. The way their eyes found each other for a moment longer during meetings, the quiet brush of Lucas's hand at the small of her back as they left an event, or simply the tender silence they shared when eating lunch in the office without trying to fill it with conversation. Ella knew she was standing at the fragile boundary between caution and desire. She had lived too long in a world ruled by careful steps, where every move was calculated to avoid falling. Lucas, with his past woven from darkness and fractured light, was the last man she ever imagined she would allow her heart to lean toward. But because he was unlike anyone else, because he saw her even when she was losing herself, because he stood beside her in her worst moments without asking for gratitude or recognition, it became impossible to pretend any longer. One Friday night, after the restaurant closed, Ella asked Lucas to walk with her around the neighborhood. The late spring air was cool, the streets unusually quiet for New York. They walked side by side like old friends, speaking only in scattered fragments, until she stopped near the small park behind the old stone church. She turned to him, her eyes calm yet resolute. "I do not know where this will go, Lucas. I am not experienced with grown-up love, and I am not someone who trusts easily. But I am tired of guessing, of keeping distance, of pretending I feel nothing every time you walk into a room." Lucas watched her silently, as though listening not to her words but to the heartbeat beneath them. Ella smiled faintly, a mix of helplessness and tenderness. "I do not need anything complicated. I just need to know that if I take your hand now, then tomorrow morning when I wake up, my hand will still be in yours. You do not have to promise anything. Just stay. Do not leave when things get hard." Lucas did not answer immediately. He stepped closer, reached out, and touched her hand lightly where it hung at her side. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Ella, I have never stayed anywhere this long, but you make me want to stop. To begin, I do not know how to love the right way, but I know how to hold on to what matters. And you are the most important thing I have ever had." Their hands tightened around each other, needing no further words. Because sometimes love does not require grand declarations, only a simple decision, to stay. They sat together on the cold stone bench in the small park, shoulders touching, the night quiet around them. Above them, the street lamp cast a soft golden glow across Ella's hair, and Lucas looked at her as though witnessing a miracle he never believed he would find. And there, in that still pocket of the city that never sleeps, two people marked by wounds, by secrets, by a longing to be healed, chose each other. Not because they knew they would last, but because they were willing to take the first step, together. The next morning, as the early summer sunlight shimmered through the glass windows of the quiet penthouse, Lucas had already been awake for some time. He lay still for several minutes, watching Ella sleep beside him, her hair spilling softly across the pillow, her face unguarded and peaceful. In that moment, he felt something shift inside him. Not a weakness, but a different kind of strength. The strength that comes when a man realizes that to protect what he loves, he must be willing to let go of the thing that once made him unbreakable. Lucas did not go to the Sterling that day. Instead, he stayed in his private office at the apartment, reviewing contracts, studying operational schedules, and finally composing a long email to the shadowed governing board, whose members rarely revealed themselves. The message was simple. Beginning next month, Lucas King would no longer directly oversee operations at the Sterling. He would transfer management to the team he had spent 3 years training, the team who understood every detail of the restaurant's workings but carried none of his past. He would step back, not disappear entirely, but enough to draw a clear line between work and personal life, something he had never been able to do before. That afternoon, when Ella stepped into his office to ask about an upcoming event, she found him sitting at his desk, focused but wearing a strangely lighter expression. She asked what had happened, and Lucas simply smiled and turned the screen so she could see the outgoing email's subject line. "You are the reason I wrote this," he said, his hand closing gently around hers. "I never thought I would walk away from the Sterling because it was the only thing I could control in a life full of chaos. But if I keep everything in my hands, I will never have time to actually live, to truly love, to genuinely trust. And I choose to trust you." Ella looked at him, her chest tightening with emotion. She had once believed Lucas was the kind of man who would always remain behind the curtain, directing everything with cold precision. But now he was stepping out of that fortress because of her, because of a relationship with no guarantees except the sincerity they gave each other. In the days that followed, the entire staff was notified of the structural changes. The Sterling did not waver. Everyone had long sensed this shift coming. Lucas still appeared on weekend evenings, still spoke with familiar guests, still observed service and food quality, but he was no longer the shadow hovering over every decision. He began taking morning walks with Ella, spending evenings reading with her on the small balcony washed in warm golden light, and wandering with her through art exhibits where he stayed quietly behind, letting her speak freely about what moved her. Ella realized that when Lucas stepped back from being the controlling owner, he became a man she could share a life with, not merely a passionate love, but a true companion. Neither of them used the word sacrifice. They called it a choice. And Lucas had chosen well. When he redrew his boundaries, it was not to abandon power but to create space wide enough for love to breathe and grow without being strangled by the shadows of old wounds. And in that space, Ella finally saw the truest version of him, not the cold king of New York's elite, but a man learning how to live again, day by day, beside her. Lucas's decision to step back from direct control of the Sterling did more than make room for their love to breathe. It opened an entirely new sky for Ella. A sky where she no longer saw herself as the girl who had once been slapped in a luxurious dining room, no longer the server scraping by shift after shift to support her father while hiding dreams she never dared to name. One morning, while organizing papers in her small office at the Sterling, Ella found her old notebook, the one filled with pastry recipes she had scribbled back in community culinary school. Messy instructions, notes on adjusting flavors for diabetics, ideas for a mobile dessert cart serving nursing homes, dreams she once cherished, then abandoned because life had become too heavy with survival. That evening, sitting beside Lucas on the sofa, her hand resting lightly on his knee, the soft golden light falling across the notebook, she told him everything. Lucas listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he asked only one question. "If you started from the beginning, would you be willing to make it real?" Ella smiled, without hesitation. "I think I have never been more ready." And so a new journey began. She did not leave the Sterling immediately. Instead, she reduced her hours, dedicating each afternoon to building her own bakery concept. It began with a tiny rented kitchen in Brooklyn, a few basic tools, and one apprentice. But Ella had what few people possessed: relentless patience, an instinct for understanding others, and a heart wide enough to see every person she served. She named her project Kind Crumbs, small crumbs of kindness. Each pastry was created not just to taste good, but to give something. Sugar-free desserts for diabetics, gluten-free options for children with allergies, pastries delivered with handwritten notes for elderly clients living alone. Lucas was the first to invest in the project, not with money, though he could have poured in hundreds of thousands without blinking, but with belief. He helped sketch logos, design the website, and every evening asked, "What new thing did you learn today?" Ella had never felt she belonged anywhere the way she belonged here. After only 3 months, Kind Crumbs was featured on a major food blog. Orders surged. Community centers reached out for donations to their charity events. A real estate firm invited her to open a small storefront near Riverside Park. Standing before that potential space, the light glinting across the glass windows, Ella held Lucas's hand tightly. "I never thought things could happen this quickly." Lucas looked at her, eyes quiet and sure. "It did not come quickly, Ella. It just came at the right time, and to the right person. In less than half a year, Ella, the woman who once bowed her head in apology over a spilled glass of red wine, now stood in her own kitchen, wearing her white cap and long coat, guiding a small but spirited team. She was not just a baker, she was a creator of opportunities, a leader, someone who turned the memory of hurt into a force for generosity. And every morning, when she opened her shop, she whispered a familiar promise to herself: today will be a kind day. Because if crumbs can hold flavor, then even the smallest act can make something extraordinary. Kind Crumbs had been open for nearly 8 months and had slowly become a beloved gathering place for people seeking sincerity in every pastry and every story behind it. Ella had not only built a brand but created a small community, a place where the elderly were heard, the young were inspired, and each pastry carried pieces of kindness that felt simple yet increasingly rare in a city known for its coldness. Lucas was always there, never intrusive, never overstepping, yet always arriving exactly when he should. He gave Ella the space she needed to grow, yet stayed close enough to be her safe place whenever exhaustion crept in. Their world seemed to be settling into a quiet harmony until one December afternoon, when a brown envelope with no sender's name appeared at the bakery's front door. At first, Ella thought it was a special delivery order, but when she opened it, the photographs inside made her fingers stiffen. They were pictures of her and Lucas, taken at different times, walking through the park, holding hands at a charity gala, even one shot through the window during a quiet dinner at his apartment. There was no note, no clue about who sent them, only a single messy sentence scrawled in black marker on the back of the last photo. It is easy to burn what someone loves most. Ella did not need to guess. She knew that feeling, that cold spike down the spine, the sudden tightness in her chest, the old instinct to retreat, hide, disappear. But this time, she was not alone. She called Lucas immediately. He arrived in less than 10 minutes, his face as cold as stone. Without speaking, he took the stack of photos, studied each one, and within seconds Ella saw his eyes change. No longer their usual storm gray, but the sharp, quiet silver of a gathering tempest. "Rico," Lucas said, almost in a breath. The name fell like a blade, freezing the air. Ella had never heard it before, but the way Lucas tightened his grip on the photos told her more than enough. He explained, slowly, a part of his past he had believed buried for good. Rico was a former partner, once the man Lucas trusted most when working in the underground world of illicit finance. They had managed money flows together, distributed profits, and patched every crack in the system. But when Lucas decided to walk away, Rico chose the opposite path. He not only stayed, he expanded the empire, partnering with darker, more dangerous forces, and he viewed Lucas's departure as unforgivable betrayal. "I thought he would never resurface," Lucas said, his gaze locked on the window. "But now he is not only coming after me, he knows about you, and that is what makes him most dangerous." Ella gripped his hand. She felt fear, yes, but not the old kind, not the kind rooted in loneliness. It was the alert fear of someone who finally understood what was truly at stake. They went to the police, hired private security for the bakery, strengthened the apartment surveillance systems, and Lucas moved Ella temporarily into a house he owned in the suburbs. But none of those precautions made her feel safer. Because Rico was not threatening her body, he was threatening the fragile trust, the quiet life she and Lucas had built piece by piece after so much damage and healing. One night, while Ella was sitting alone in the kitchen of the new house, the phone rang, an unknown number. She answered and remained silent. For the first 3 seconds, no one spoke. Then a man's voice, low and bored as though he were yawning. "Your pastries, they are very sweet, but too much sweetness can cause decay." Then a dry, broken laugh. She hung up, her heart pounding, and almost instantly Lucas appeared in the doorway, as if instinct had pulled him toward her. He did not ask what she heard. He simply wrapped his arms around her tightly, wordlessly, and Ella understood. The storm had truly begun. And this time, they would not only need to withstand it, they would have to fight. Not just to protect themselves, but to protect what they had built together from the ruins. Lucas did not sleep for 3 nights after the threatening call. He did not talk much, but his eyes had changed, not the quiet steadiness she knew, but a simmering light, the look of a man who had lost everything once and would do anything not to lose again. In his old office at the Sterling, the place where he had once hidden the remnants of his past life, Lucas dug through old data, called contacts he had severed long ago, and stepped once more into the world he had sworn to leave. Rico was no longer a shadowed name. He had resurfaced in New York, and Lucas's hired sources quickly confirmed his movements. Rico was laundering money through a chain of legitimate businesses, from art galleries to educational investment funds. But what enraged Lucas most was learning that Rico had approached Kind Crumbs under a different name, posing as a potential investor. Rico wanted access to Ella, not only to threaten but to claim, to steal one of the last good things Lucas had left. One evening, while Ella was staying late at the bakery preparing holiday orders, the front window shattered under a large stone. She ducked behind the counter as footsteps echoed across the floor. 3 men entered, no masks, no words. One of them was Rico. His face was expressionless, his eyes black as coal, scanning the place as though he owned it. Ella stood slowly, forcing her voice to stay steady. "What do you want?" Rico laughed, low and slow. "Not much. I just want you to understand that everything Lucas owns can be taken back, just like what he once took from me." Ella clenched her fists, placing herself between him and the display case where she kept the earliest recipes she ever wrote. She said nothing, but her eyes did not falter. At that moment, a loud crash came from the back door, and Lucas stepped inside, a gun holstered at his hip but not drawn. His gaze fixed on Rico, unblinking. "Enough," he said, his voice calm enough to chill the room. "Leave." Rico laughed loudly. "And who do you think you are to order me?" Lucas walked forward, eyes sharp as blades. "I am the one who knows what you did in Caracas that year. I am the one holding the recording of you ordering the removal of a bank director when he threatened to expose everything. And I am the one ready to burn every asset you have laundered if you touch her again." Rico froze. One of his men stepped back. Lucas pulled out his phone, tapped a button, and placed it on the counter. The recording played clear, undeniable. Rico cursed and spun toward Lucas, suddenly unsteady. "You would not dare release that. You burn with me." Lucas's lips curved slightly, though his eyes never softened. "I already burned once. Did you forget?" For several seconds, tension stretched to its limit. Then Rico lifted a hand. The 3 men turned and walked out. No more threats, no parting words. But Ella knew Lucas had just ended a cycle of darkness that had haunted him for years. Police arrived afterward, took statements, secured the footage. Lucas handed over every piece of evidence to the same attorney who had once helped him work with federal authorities during the years he disappeared. A new investigation opened this time, with enough proof to dismantle an entire network. That night, as Ella sat in her small office, Lucas came to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned into him, eyes closed. "Are you afraid?" she whispered. Lucas inhaled deeply. "Yes, but not for me. For you. Because you are the most precious thing I have ever had. And for the first time in my life, I understand what it means to fight not for honor, but for love." Ella turned, cupping his face. "I feel the same. And I will never let you fight alone." In each other's arms, they understood that what had passed between them was more than a confrontation. It was a final cleansing. From this point on, no old ghost would stand between them. Only the brave choice to stay side by side through every storm. A week after the confrontation with Rico, New York entered its final December days, colder than usual but stunning, each street draped in soft golden light, and windows glowing with holiday color. Ella returned to her rhythm at Kind Crumbs, but she was no longer the bakery owner who moved as though something fragile might crumble at any moment. She worked with a different posture, lighter, steadier, as if something quiet and certain had settled inside her to guard her happiness. Lucas was almost never far from her. Even while busy reorganizing his private investment system after handing over Rico's files, he appeared every morning with 2 cups of coffee, one black for him, one coconut latte for her, and a smile that never failed. That evening, as Ella planned to close the bakery early so she and Lucas could have dinner together, she received a text message. "Do not head back yet. There is something I want to show you. Wear something warm." The simple message made her heartbeat quicken. A sleek black car awaited her outside, and the driver took her to a location not listed on any schedule. They stopped at a small pier along the Hudson, where an old-fashioned yacht was docked, lit beautifully with strings of lights that shimmered like stars. On deck, a red carpet runner and a dinner table for 2 stood beside the railing facing the river's shimmering reflection of the city lights. Lucas stood there in a simple gray suit, his hands in his pockets, watching her approach as though every breath she took was something he wanted to protect. "I know you do not like anything too extravagant," he said with a small smile as she reached him. "But tonight I need a quiet place where you can clearly hear what I am about to say." They had dinner to the soft rise of jazz music, sharing memories and dreams for the future, no longer worrying about tomorrow's storms but imagining how beautiful tomorrow could be. When Ella lifted her wineglass to her lips, Lucas rose, pulling a small teal box from his pocket. He did not kneel like in the films, did not repeat any rehearsed lines. He simply placed the box into her open palm. "I have traveled very far to find myself again. I have lost more than once. But across every path I walked, you are the one thing that made me want to stop. Not to hide anymore, but to build." He held her gaze, his voice quieter. "Ella Parker, will you build that with me? Not as the wife of Lucas King, but as the companion of a man who has finally learned that love is not control, it is trust." Ella did not answer right away. She opened the box, saw the silver ring with its deep blue sapphire, a simple, elegant piece, as profound as the way he looked at her. Then she looked up, eyes shimmering, her smile luminous. "As long as you keep one promise," she whispered. "Tomorrow morning, when I wake up, my hand will still be in yours." Lucas smiled, stepped closer, took her hand, and pressed a kiss to her forehead like a vow. Above them, there were no fireworks, no cheering crowds, only the gentle brush of river waves against the boat and the steady rhythm of two hearts beating together. And there, in the very city that had once wounded them, Lucas and Ella chose to begin a new chapter, not perfect, not guaranteed, but honest enough that with a single promise, it felt like forever. The wedding of Ella and Lucas took place on a soft, early spring afternoon in a small garden tucked deep within the northern suburbs of New York, where ancient trees draped their branches like velvet curtains and cherry blossoms drifted gently in the breeze. There were no gold-plated chairs, no grand choirs, only close friends, a few old colleagues from Sterling, and the loyal patrons of Kind Crumbs, people who had quietly witnessed Ella's journey from a timid, clumsy young woman to someone confident, self-reliant, and deeply compassionate. Lucas wore a classic black suit, his gaze fixed on Ella from the moment she stepped down an aisle sprinkled with fresh lavender. She wore a simple white dress, without a sweeping train or extravagant lace, but every stitch carried a sense of quiet grace, as if reflecting who she truly was. When they exchanged their vows, no one could hide their emotion. Ella held Lucas's hands, her voice trembling slightly though her eyes remained steady. "I once thought love was something fragile, something that could vanish like a bubble of air. But you taught me that real love does not need grand promises. It only needs someone who stays, no matter what tomorrow brings." Lucas looked at her, smiling, and instead of answering with polished words, he simply said, "I traveled so far to find you. And now, I am not going anywhere." After the ceremony, they did not fly to a lavish island or check into a 5-star hotel for a honeymoon. Instead, they drove to the small suburban house Lucas had once prepared as a safe haven for Ella when Rico returned. Now that house became their true home, the place where they began again, from the smallest things, choosing curtain colors, learning to cook breakfast together, and dedicating one day each weekend to doing nothing but reading and sharing the thoughts they had never voiced to anyone else. Ella continued growing Kind Crumbs, opening a small branch in Brooklyn with the help of a team of young bakers she trained under her original philosophy. Bake with heart, serve with kindness. Lucas began rewriting the notes he had kept from his years in the underground world, not to publish or prove anything, but as a way to cleanse himself, to speak with the version of his past self he had long avoided. He spent more time on community projects, especially supporting young men who had once made mistakes and now needed a chance to learn a trade and find their way back. Their life was simple, but never dull. Each day together was an open conversation, sometimes a debate, sometimes quiet, always honest enough to make the other feel safe. In the mornings, Ella woke to the smell of coffee he had already brewed. In the evenings, Lucas returned home with a gentle kiss on her forehead, and the same question he asked every night: "Was there something that made you happy today?" Their life was not without worries, but the difference now was that they carried those burdens together. And in that small house with its warm golden light glowing from the window and laughter echoing whenever someone burned a dessert, Ella and Lucas truly began a life that belonged to them. On a late summer afternoon, Ella sat in the sunlit kitchen, looking through the window at the lavender field blooming in deep violet. Lucas had gone, out for a walk with the little dog they adopted months ago. The wind chime tinkled softly on the porch, carrying a cool breath from the distant tree line, and Ella paused in the middle of jotting down notes for a new pastry recipe. She looked up, her mind drifting slowly toward years that no longer existed, yet felt vivid as if they had happened only yesterday. From the moment a glass of red wine shattered across the marble floor at Sterling, the young woman who knew nothing except how to bow her head and apologize had walked through more storms than she could count to become the woman she was now. No one had taught her how to stand up after being slapped in front of a crowd. No one handed her a map to navigate doubt, fear, the sleepless nights filled with tears over her ailing father or her own wounded heart. But that journey had taught her the deepest lesson, that kindness is not weakness, that quiet compassion is never meaningless, and that real love does not grow from grand gestures, but from the small daily actions born of someone choosing you again and again. Lucas was the same. A man who had stepped out of a shadowed past, who once believed he would never love again, learned to open himself, admit his mistakes, and choose change. He had not saved Ella like a hero in a story. He simply stood with her, trusted her, and walked beside her through old hurts until they reached a light neither of them had ever dared to imagine. This is not a story about miracles. It is a story about choices. The choice not to give up when everything seems to fall apart. The choice to love when it would be easier to close your heart. And the choice to live a meaningful life, even when it begins from something as small as a kitchen scented with pastries and the sound of genuine laughter. If you have stayed with us until this moment, thank you. Ella and Lucas's story may not resemble your life, but perhaps somewhere inside each of us, there was a time when we felt small, longed for someone to see us, believe in us, and choose to stay. How did this story make you feel? Did it touch something deep within your heart? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. We truly want to hear you, understand you, and honor the most genuine part of you. If you enjoy heartfelt stories, rich with humanity and lingering long after the last word, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it so that kindness can reach even more people. We return every day with stories full of depth, truth, and emotion, especially for those who are still searching for connection and hope in our modern world. Wherever you are listening from across the globe, I wish you good health, joy, abundance, and peace in every moment of your life. Thank you for staying until the very end. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.